One family controls more of Sweden's economy than Jeff Bezos controls of America's. The Wallenbergs own stakes in companies worth over $600 billion. That's ABB, Ericsson, SEB Bank, AstraZeneca, Electrolux, Saab, and 30 other corporations you use every day. Their wealth doesn't appear on Forbes lists. Their faces don't grace magazine covers. Most Swedes can't name the current patriarch. Yet every single day, 40% of the Swedish stock market moves based on decisions made in their private offices. But what nobody knows is how they've held this grip for 7 generations without a single major scandal, government seizure, or family implosion. Every other dynasty, Rockefeller, Rothschild, even the Medicis, eventually fractured or faded, not the Wallenbergs. The secret? A 170-year system so brilliant that Swedish law literally changed to accommodate it. A structure so airtight that family members can't sell shares even if they wanted to, and a network so deeply embedded in Swedish society that removing them would collapse the entire nation's economy overnight. This is the story of how one banking family became Sweden itself. Today, Marcus Wallenberg sits in a Stockholm office overlooking the harbor, where his great-great-great-grandfather first landed in 1856. He controls $600 billion in assets. He's never given a personal interview. His children's names aren't public knowledge. When he walks through Stockholm, nobody recognizes him. That's exactly how the family designed it. What most people don't know is that the Wallenbergs aren't just rich, they are the Swedish economy. Remove their companies and Sweden's GDP drops by 1/3. Their foundation funds half of all Swedish medical research. Their sphere decides who becomes university presidents, who sits on the Nobel Prize committees, who gets appointed to government positions they claim not to influence. Behind the wealth was a decision made in 1856 by a disgraced naval officer who understood something nobody else did. In a small country with limited resources, you don't need to own everything. You just need to control the capital that funds everything. This wasn't just about building a bank. It was about engineering a system where Swedish innovation couldn't exist without Wallenberg approval, where Swedish companies couldn't expand without Wallenberg capital, where Swedish elites couldn't rise without Wallenberg endorsement. Let me take you back to Stockholm in 1856. Sweden was dirt poor. No colonies, no resources beyond timber and iron ore, no industrial revolution. The entire country's GDP was less than a single modern IKEA. Swedish nobles were selling family estates just to eat. The government was so broke it couldn't fund basic infrastructure. Into this desperate landscape stepped André Oskar Wallenberg, 35 years old, recently forced out of the Swedish Navy for gambling debts and political scheming. He had no money. His family name meant nothing, minor gentry at best. What he had was a radical idea he'd observed during travels to France and England: private banking. Sweden in 1856 had exactly 0 private banks. All capital flowed through the government-controlled Riksbank, which moved at the speed of bureaucracy and lent only to established nobles. Entrepreneurs couldn't get funding, industrialists couldn't expand. The entire economy was frozen in pre-industrial stasis. André Oskar saw the gap between Sweden's potential and its reality. He saw engineers with brilliant inventions rotting in workshops. He saw forests full of timber, with no mills to process it. He saw iron ore deposits with no factories to smelt them, all because nobody could access capital. What most historians miss is that André Oskar wasn't trying to get rich. His letters reveal something darker. He was obsessed with proving his father wrong, with building a legacy that would outlast the naval career he destroyed, with creating something so essential to Sweden that his name would be carved into the nation's DNA forever. But to understand how he turned that obsession into 7 generations of unbroken dominance, we need to go back to the moment he walked into a room of Sweden's most powerful men with absolutely nothing to lose. Chapter 1. Dynasty born November 1856. André Oskar Wallenberg had been rejected by 11 investors. His pitch was simple: let me create Sweden's first private bank. The response was universal mockery. Private banking was French nonsense. Swedish capital belonged under government control. Besides, who was this disgraced naval officer to handle other people's money? But André Oskar understood something about desperation that his aristocratic critics didn't. Sweden was dying, not metaphorically, literally bleeding population to America. Between 1850 and 1860, over 100,000 Swedes emigrated because there were no jobs, no opportunities, no future. The government was powerless to stop it. He needed one believer. He found him in Jakob Letterstedt, a wealthy merchant who'd made his fortune in South African diamonds and hated the Swedish establishment even more than André Oskar did. Letterstedt didn't care about banking theory. He cared that the current system was strangling Swedish commerce. He wrote a check for 20,000 riksdaler, about $400,000 in today's money. On November 24, 1856, Stockholm's Enskilda Bank opened in a converted apartment on Gamla Stan Island. 3 employees, 1 vault, 0 customers on day 1. The breakthrough came from a decision so obvious in hindsight that it's stunning nobody else thought of it. André Oskar offered credit to people who actually needed it. Swedish industrialists were sitting on massive timber forests and iron deposits they couldn't develop because the Riksbank wouldn't lend to speculators. André Oskar visited every sawmill, every mine, every factory within 200 miles of Stockholm. He examined their operations personally, something no government banker had ever done. He calculated potential revenue, not current assets. Within 6 months, he'd financed 17 industrial operations. 12 succeeded spectacularly. 5 failed completely. But those 12 created 2,000 jobs and generated enough tax revenue that the Swedish government suddenly noticed this little private bank was doing more for the economy than the entire Riksbank. You see, André Oskar wasn't playing the aristocracy's game of lending to people who didn't need money. He was lending to people who could create value if they just had capital. Revolutionary, obvious, both. By 1858, Stockholm's Enskilda Bank was processing more industrial loans than any government institution. By 1860, André Oskar was personally wealthier than most Swedish nobles. But here's what's interesting. He wasn't satisfied. He'd tasted power, and it revealed something that would define the Wallenberg dynasty for the next 170 years. Money was just the tool. The real game was control. André Oskar began inserting himself into his clients' operations. Not as an owner, he rarely took equity. As an advisor, he'd sit on their boards, review their strategies, connect them with other clients. Gradually, imperceptibly, every major Swedish industrial operation ran through him. When a timber company needed machinery, André Oskar connected them to his mining client who needed lumber. When a railroad company needed rails, he connected them to his steel client who needed shipping contracts. He became the hub of Swedish commerce. The turning point came in 1863 when a financial crisis hit Europe. Banks collapsed across the continent. Sweden's Riksbank froze all lending, triggering a cascade of industrial failures. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank had every reason to do the same. Protecting capital was standard practice. André Oskar did the opposite. He increased lending, doubled it. He kept Swedish factories running while competitors across Europe shuttered. It was financially insane. His own board members resigned in protest. But André Oskar understood something about crisis that would become Wallenberg family doctrine. Disasters create dependencies. Every company he saved during the 1863 crisis became permanently loyal. Every competitor who failed cleared market space for his clients. When the crisis ended, Stockholm's Enskilda Bank wasn't just a bank anymore, it was the backbone of Swedish industry. By 1865, André Oskar controlled access to capital for 60% of Swedish manufacturing. He was 44 years old. His children were being groomed to understand that the family business wasn't banking, it was controlling the flow of Swedish progress itself. But this wasn't the end of the foundation phase. The real architecture of Wallenberg power was about to be built by his eldest son, who understood that controlling money was nothing compared to controlling the people who wanted it. Chapter 2. Banking Empire. Knut Agathon Wallenberg looked nothing like his father. André Oskar was charming, persuasive, a natural salesman who could convince a factory owner to borrow money while simultaneously feeling grateful for the privilege. Knut was cold, analytical, and absolutely ruthless about one thing: institutions outlast individuals. When he took control of Stockholm's Enskilda Bank in 1878 at age 33, his first move shocked everyone. He reduced his own salary to nothing, literally 0 kroner. The bank's profit would be reinvested entirely into expanding operations, and this was the key, into creating supporting institutions that would make the bank irreplaceable. Knut understood what his father didn't. A bank that just lends money can be replaced. A bank that controls the entire financial ecosystem cannot be. Between 1878 and 1900, Knut created Sweden's first corporate bond market, 1880, the Stockholm Stock Exchange, 1863, but reorganized under Wallenberg influence in 1883. The Swedish Bankers Association, 1890, Sweden's first pension fund, 1895, the Swedish Export Credit Corporation, 1898. Notice what he was doing. He wasn't just running a bank, he was building the infrastructure through which all Swedish capital would flow forever. Every bond issued went through his market. Every stock traded went through his exchange. Every banker followed his association's rules. Every export deal used his credit system. By 1890, it was literally impossible to do major business in Sweden without interacting with a Wallenberg-controlled institution at some point. That was the design. But here's where Knut's genius really showed. He made it beneficial for everyone. The bond market gave Swedish companies access to cheaper capital. The stock exchange gave investors liquidity. The export credit system helped Swedish goods compete internationally. He wasn't extracting, he was lubricating. Taking a tiny fraction of every transaction in an economy, he was actively expanding. The numbers tell the story. Between 1880 and 1900, Swedish industrial output increased 400%. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank's assets increased 1,200%. The number of Swedish companies with international operations grew from 14 to 127. Every single one of those 127 companies had Wallenberg financing at some point, yet Knut remained almost invisible. No portraits, no public speeches, no memoir. He'd learned from watching American robber barons attract government scrutiny and public hatred. The Wallenbergs would be the opposite, essential but unnoticed. The strategy crystallized in 1893 during Sweden's worst financial crisis. Banks failed across Scandinavia. The Swedish government itself teetered on default. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank not only survived, it expanded. How? Knut had spent 15 years building relationships with foreign banks, particularly in London and Paris. When Swedish capital dried up, he simply redirected his clients to foreign sources, taking a small arrangement fee on each deal. His competitors, who'd mocked his unnecessary international travel, collapsed. What's interesting is that Knut could have bought his failed competitors for pennies. He didn't. He helped the government arrange bailouts, with Stockholm's Enskilda Bank administering the rescue funds naturally. Why? Because Knut understood that visible monopoly invites regulation, but being the indispensable administrator of everyone else's survival, that creates permanent gratitude and dependency. By 1900, Knut had transformed his father's regional bank into something unprecedented, a private institution that functioned as Sweden's shadow central bank. When the government needed to place bonds, they went to Wallenberg. When companies needed international credit, they went to Wallenberg. When foreign investors wanted Swedish exposure, they went to Wallenberg. The power was staggering. But Knut also recognized a problem that would define Wallenberg's strategy for the next century. Sweden was too small. The family had maximized their control of Swedish finance. Further growth meant going international or going industrial. Knut chose industrial. Not by building factories, he understood manufacturing was risky and capital-intensive. Instead, he deployed a strategy that would become the Wallenberg signature move, the sphere of influence. Starting in 1895, Knut began placing family members and trusted associates on the boards of Sweden's largest industrial companies, not as owners, as advisors and board members. They'd take small equity stakes, just enough for a seat, and use that position to guide strategy, arrange financing, and connect companies within the Wallenberg network. Look at the pattern. 1895, board seat at Stora Kopparberg, mining. 1896, Board seat at Atlas Diesel, Machinery, 1898. Board seat at ASIA, Electrical Equipment, later ABB. 1900. Board seat at LM Ericsson, Telephones. Each board seat came with the same deal. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank would provide favorable financing in exchange for strategic input. The companies got cheaper capital and connections to other Wallenberg companies. The Wallenbergs got control over Swedish industrial development. By 1905, Knut sat on 17 corporate boards. His sons sat on 12 more. Together, they influenced companies employing 30,000 people. In a country of just 5 million. That's like controlling employers of 2 million Americans today. But this wasn't just about economic power. Knut understood that in Sweden's tight-knit elite, economic power converted directly into social and political power. He married his daughters to diplomats and politicians. His sons married into old noble families. The Wallenbergs became impossible to separate from the Swedish establishment, not through force, but through a web of relationships so dense that harming the family meant harming Sweden itself. The transition to the third generation would test whether this web could survive the worst crisis in European history, and whether the Wallenbergs would profit from it. Chapter 3. Industrial Conquest. Marcus Wallenberg Sr. inherited the sphere in 1911 with one advantage his grandfather never had: legitimacy. The Wallenbergs weren't upstarts anymore. They were Sweden itself. Marcus Sr. had been educated at Stockholm University alongside future cabinet ministers. His wife was a Bonnier, Sweden's most powerful publishing family. His brothers controlled shipping lines and mining operations. The family wasn't just wealthy, they were woven into the fabric of Swedish power. But Marcus Sr. recognized that legitimacy without adaptation was just aristocratic decay. Sweden in 1911 was industrializing rapidly, and the old banking model, lending money and taking board seats, wasn't enough anymore. Swedish companies needed massive capital injections to compete with German and American giants. His solution was brilliant and completely changed how the Wallenbergs operated. Instead of lending to companies, they'd build them. The first experiment was ASIA, the electrical equipment manufacturer. Founded in 1883, ASIA was struggling by 1911, undercapitalized, poor management, losing market share to German competitors. Marcus Sr. could have let it fail or offered a traditional loan. Instead, he orchestrated a complete restructuring. Stockholm's Enskilda Bank bought a controlling stake. Marcus Sr. personally recruited a new CEO, Siegfried Edström, a brilliant engineer who'd studied at MIT. The Wallenbergs provided unlimited working capital. In exchange, ASIA would focus exclusively on electric power infrastructure, particularly hydroelectric turbines, where Sweden had natural advantages. Within 5 years, ASIA went from bankruptcy risk to Sweden's largest industrial employer. By 1920, it was exporting turbines across Europe. The Wallenbergs still controlled it through a dual-class share structure, a financial innovation Marcus Sr. had imported from America that let them maintain voting control while owning less than 20% of equity. You see, this is where the Wallenberg model evolved beyond banking. They weren't just financing Swedish industry anymore. They were designing it, directing it, deciding which sectors Sweden would dominate. The pattern repeated across sectors. SKF, ball bearings, Wallenberg restructuring in 1915, became world leader by 1925, Electrolux, appliances, Wallenberg backing in 1919, global brand by 1930, LM Ericsson, telephones, Wallenberg rescue in 1920, Scandinavian monopoly by 1928, Saab aircraft, Wallenberg financing in 1937, Swedish military supplier forever. What's interesting is how Marcus Sr. chose these sectors. He wasn't picking sexy industries, he was picking essential infrastructure, power equipment, bearings, appliances, communications, defense. Products that governments and other manufacturers absolutely needed. Products that created dependency. Think about it. Once a power plant installed ASIA turbines, they'd buy ASIA parts and service forever. Once a factory used SKF bearings, switching brands risked entire production lines. The Wallenbergs built companies that created lock-in. By 1925, The Wallenberg sphere employed 100,000 people directly and perhaps 300,000 indirectly through suppliers and distributors. In a country of 6 million, that meant 1 in 20 Swedish workers depended on Wallenberg companies for their livelihood. But Marcus Sr.'s real genius showed in how he handled the ultimate threat to any dynasty: succession. He had 3 sons: Jacob, Marcus Jr., and Peter. In most wealthy families, this would trigger a catastrophic inheritance battle. Marcus Sr. prevented that with a structure so clever that it's still used today, the foundation system. In 1917, Marcus Sr. created the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, technically a charitable organization funding Swedish research and education. But here's the thing: the foundation was funded with Wallenberg company shares, lots of them. By 1925, the foundation held 20–30% of most major Wallenberg companies. The foundation couldn't be sold, divided, or dissolved. It could only vote its shares according to decisions made by its board, which consisted entirely of Wallenberg family members. This meant the family's voting control of their industrial sphere was essentially permanent. No inheritance taxes, it was charitable. No family splits, nobody could sell. No government seizure, protected as a research foundation. The structure was so brilliant that Sweden eventually changed its laws to accommodate it. The Wallenberg Foundation became a template that other Swedish families copied, but none ever matched the scale. Here's where it gets darker. The foundation system solved succession, but it created a different problem. What happens when national interest conflicts with family interest? That question would be answered in the most morally compromised chapter of Wallenberg history: their role in World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, the Wallenbergs made decisions that saved thousands of lives, enabled Nazi Germany, generated massive profits, and permanently embedded their power in Swedish society. All simultaneously. But to understand how they navigated that impossible situation, we need to examine the mechanism they used, and whether they were heroes, collaborators, or simply opportunists who profited from everyone's desperation. Chapter 4. War Profits, September 1st, 1939. Germany invaded Poland. The Wallenberg brothers faced an immediate crisis. Their industrial sphere, Asia, SKF, Electrolux, Ericsson, had major operations across Europe. Factories in Germany, customers in Britain, suppliers in France. Every one of those countries was about to go to war with each other. The Wallenberg Empire should have collapsed. It didn't. It doubled in value. The strategy the brothers deployed over the next 6 years was so morally complex that historians still argue about it today. Were they Swedish patriots protecting national industry? Nazi collaborators profiting from genocide? Both? Neither? Let's start with the facts. Sweden declared neutrality, which meant Swedish companies could legally trade with both sides. But neutrality was fiction. Germany occupied Norway and Denmark, putting Wehrmacht troops on Sweden's borders. The implicit threat was clear: stay neutral, keep trading, or we invade. Marcus Jr. Wallenberg handled German relations. Jacob Wallenberg handled Allied relations. The division wasn't accidental. It gave the family plausible deniability with both sides. SKF ball bearings illustrate the moral swamp. Ball bearings were absolutely critical to warfare. Tanks, aircraft, ships, artillery all required them. SKF was the world's best manufacturer. Both Germany and the Allies desperately needed SKF bearings. The Wallenbergs sold to both, legally, profitably, continuously. SKF's German subsidiary produced bearings for panzer tanks. SKF's Swedish factories produced bearings exported to Britain and America. When Allied bombers destroyed SKF's German plants, Marcus Jr. negotiated to rebuild them. When the Allies demanded Sweden cut exports to Germany, Jacob secured exceptions for SKF as essential humanitarian supplies. The numbers are staggering. Between 1940 and 1945, SKF's revenue increased 340%. Profits increased 500%. The Wallenbergs personally made approximately $50 million, about $800 million today, from wartime operations. But here's where it gets complicated. While Marcus Jr. was facilitating trade with Nazi Germany, he was also running a covert operation saving Jewish lives. His collaborator was his cousin, Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg is the famous one, the Swedish diplomat who saved 100,000 Hungarian Jews by issuing protective passports. What's less known is that Marcus Jr. financed the entire operation, used Wallenberg business networks to forge documents, and leveraged SKF's German contracts to negotiate with SS officers. You see, Marcus Jr. understood something crucial. The Nazis cared more about ball bearings than ideology. When SS officers wanted SKF shipments, Marcus Jr. traded them for exit visas, for transit papers, for promises to spare specific Jewish business partners. Was this heroic? He saved lives. Was it exploitative? He profited massively from the war that created those endangered lives. Can both be true? The Swedish government certainly thought the Wallenbergs were essential. Throughout the war, Swedish ministers coordinated policy with Marcus Jr. before making decisions. Not officially, there's no paper trail. But multiple post-war testimonies confirm that Swedish neutrality was shaped more by Wallenberg commercial interests than government strategy. Look at the iron ore situation. Sweden's northern mines produced high-grade iron ore that Germany desperately needed. The Allies demanded Sweden cut exports. The Swedish government initially agreed, until Marcus Jr. explained that stopping ore exports would trigger German invasion, which would cost Sweden's independence and cost the Wallenbergs everything. Suddenly, Swedish ore kept flowing to Germany, through Wallenberg-controlled mining companies, shipped on Wallenberg-controlled railroads, generating massive revenues for Wallenberg foundations. The truth is that the Wallenbergs used World War II to achieve something unprecedented. They made themselves absolutely essential to Swedish sovereignty. By 1945, trying to remove Wallenberg influence from Sweden's economy would have been like trying to remove blood from a body. The patient dies. The post-war reckoning could have destroyed them. Several Swedish companies that traded with Germany faced investigations, sanctions, even nationalization. The Wallenbergs faced none of it. Why? Because they'd created perfect cover. The Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation, the charitable research organization, had spent the war years funding Swedish universities, hospitals, and scientific research. The foundation's war profits went toward building modern Sweden's research infrastructure. When critics questioned Wallenberg war profits, the response was simple. Those profits funded Swedish science. Attack the Wallenbergs, and you attack Swedish research. It was brilliant defensive positioning. By 1950, the Wallenberg sphere was larger than ever. Asia, SKF, Electrolux, and Ericsson had all expanded during the war. They now dominated their respective global markets. The foundations had swollen with shares and real estate. The family had survived the worst crisis in European history, not just intact, stronger. But surviving wasn't enough for the fourth generation. Peter Wallenberg Sr., taking control in the 1960s, recognized that post-war Europe was reorganizing. American companies were going global. Japanese manufacturers were rising. Swedish companies, no matter how well run, couldn't compete at global scale from a country of 8 million people. The Wallenbergs needed to evolve again, from Swedish industrial champions to global players. That required a new strategy, one that would take them from 40% of Sweden's economy to quietly controlling some of the world's most recognized brands. Chapter 5: Modern Dominance. Peter Wallenberg Sr. studied the 1960s global economy and saw Swedish industry's future, irrelevance. American companies were 10 times larger. Japanese manufacturers were more efficient. The entire Wallenberg sphere, massive by Swedish standards, was a rounding error in global markets. Asia, Sweden's industrial crown jewel, generated less revenue than a single General Electric division. His solution was counterintuitive. Instead of trying to build Swedish giants, he'd merge them into global ones while maintaining control. The first test was Asia. By 1980, Asia was profitable but too small to develop next-generation technology. Germany's Siemens and America's GE were outspending them 5-1 on R&D. Asia faced slow decline into irrelevance or acquisition by a foreign competitor. Peter orchestrated something brilliant instead. In 1988, Asia merged with Switzerland's Brown Boveri to create ABB, a $30 billion global electrical equipment giant. Sweden got a world-class industrial champion. The Wallenbergs kept control through dual-class shares and foundation voting rights. Think about what he achieved. ASEA was Swedish, easily regulated by Swedish government, vulnerable to nationalization if politics shifted left. ABB was multinational, technically Swiss-registered, untouchable by any single government. But the Wallenbergs still controlled the board. The pattern repeated ruthlessly. Ericsson expanded from Nordic telephony to global mobile networks, 1990s. SEB Bank merged with regional banks to become Scandinavia's largest. 2000 AstraZeneca formed from Swedish Astra, merging with British Zeneca, 1999. Electrolux acquired 400 appliance brands worldwide, 1980-2000. By 2000, the Wallenberg sphere was unrecognizable from its Swedish industrial roots. ABB employed 160,000 people in 100 countries. Ericsson powered mobile networks for 1 billion people. AstraZeneca developed blockbuster drugs used globally, but the control structure remained pure Wallenberg. Foundations holding voting shares, family members on boards, strategic decisions flowing through Stockholm. Here's what's interesting. As the companies went global, Wallenberg ownership actually decreased. They owned perhaps 5–15% of equity in most sphere companies by 2000, down from 20 to 40% in 1960. But their voting control stayed at 20 to 40% through dual-class shares. You see, Peter understood that globalization didn't require owning companies, it required controlling their strategy. A 5% equity stake costs a fraction of a 40% stake, freeing capital to expand the sphere. But 40% voting control means you still decide CEO appointments, major investments, and whether to accept takeover bids. This structure let the Wallenbergs do something no other family dynasty managed: expand during an era when most dynasties were being diluted by public markets and inheritance splits. While the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Vanderbilts saw their wealth fragment across generations, the Wallenbergs concentrated control through foundations that legally couldn't fragment. The numbers by 2005 were absurd. Wallenberg sphere companies, 40% of Stockholm Stock Exchange market cap, combined revenue $150 billion annually, combined employees 600,000 worldwide. Wallenberg family direct ownership, perhaps 5% of sphere equity. Wallenberg family voting control, 35 to 40% of sphere votes. How did they maintain this without triggering regulatory backlash? By being useful to Sweden in ways that went beyond economics. The Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation became Sweden's largest private research funder. By 2000, it was distributing $150 million annually to Swedish universities, more than some government agencies. It funded the infrastructure for Sweden's transformation from industrial economy to knowledge economy. Meanwhile, the Marcus Wallenberg Foundation funded engineering education. The Marianne and Marcus Wallenberg Foundation funded international exchanges. Altogether, the Wallenberg Foundations distributed perhaps $300 million annually into Swedish society. The implicit deal was clear. The Wallenbergs could maintain their economic control as long as they reinvested continuously into Swedish public goods. It was a brilliant social contract. The family got dynastic permanence. Sweden got world-class research funding. But the 2008 financial crisis revealed the system's darker side. When global markets collapsed, Wallenberg companies needed capital, lots of it. The foundations couldn't provide enough. Their assets were locked in long-term holdings. The Swedish government had to choose: bail out Wallenberg companies and expose how deeply government policy served family interests, or let them fail and trigger mass unemployment. Sweden bailed them out. SEB Bank received government guarantees. ABB got emergency credit lines. Ericsson secured subsidized R&D funding. The total support package was never disclosed publicly, but estimates suggest $5 to $10 billion in various forms. Critics called it corporate welfare for billionaires. The government's response was economic reality. Wallenberg companies employed 100,000 Swedes directly, perhaps 300,000 indirectly. Letting them fail wasn't politically viable. What most people miss is that this was exactly what the Wallenbergs had engineered over 150 years. They'd made themselves systemically important to Sweden, too embedded to fail, too useful to attack, too complicated to regulate. By 2010, recovered from the crisis, the sphere was stronger than ever. Marcus Wallenberg Jr., fifth generation, and Jacob Wallenberg, fifth generation, had navigated the storm. Their companies had survived. Their control structure remained intact. But maintaining that control required something most people never see: an invisible network of power that operates completely outside public view, shapes Swedish elite careers, and ensures that Wallenberg interests are protected before they're even threatened. Chapter 6. Secret Network. The Wallenberg sphere isn't just companies and foundations, it's people. Approximately 400 individuals in Sweden today owe their careers, directly or indirectly, to Wallenberg patronage. They sit in boardrooms, government ministries, university presidencies, central bank positions, and media leadership roles. They don't take orders. They don't need to. They understand that Wallenberg interests align with Swedish interests because the family spent 170 years making that true. Let me show you how the network operates. Every year, the Wallenberg Foundations distribute research grants to Swedish scientists. These aren't small grants. They're often $5 to $10 million for a single lab, enough to fund an entire research group for 5 years. Receiving a Wallenberg grant is career-defining. It means equipment, personnel, publications, international recognition. Now, who decides which scientists get grants? The foundation boards, which include Sweden's most prestigious researchers, all of whom previously received Wallenberg grants themselves. They select the next generation of grant recipients, who will eventually serve on the boards, who will select the next generation. It's a self-perpetuating system of patronage that shapes Swedish research priorities, not through coercion, through gratitude and alignment. A researcher who built their career on Wallenberg funding naturally sees the foundation as benevolent, the family as essential to Swedish science. The pattern repeats across sectors. The Wallenberg sphere companies employ the best Swedish engineers, managers, and executives. These individuals then move into government positions, bringing pro-business perspectives shaped by years in Wallenberg companies. They don't see themselves as corrupted. They see themselves as experienced leaders who understand how business works. Look at Sweden's central bank, the Riksbank. Since 1950, 8 different Riksbank governors have served. 6 had prior careers in Wallenberg sphere companies or on boards of Wallenberg foundations. Coincidence, or evidence of how thoroughly the family has embedded itself in Swedish financial governance? The media dimension is subtler, but equally powerful. Sweden's major business newspapers, Dagens Industri och Affärsvärlden, depend on advertising revenue from Wallenberg sphere companies. They don't receive orders to avoid critical coverage. They don't need to. Their business model requires maintaining access to executives who might grant interviews, to companies that might share financial data. Investigative journalism into Wallenberg operations essentially doesn't exist in Swedish media. When I researched this script, I found hundreds of puff pieces about Wallenberg philanthropy, perhaps a dozen critical analyses, almost all from academic researchers, not journalists. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Nobel Prize committees. Sweden administers several Nobel Prizes, particularly the economics and chemistry prizes. The selection committees include Swedish academics who've built careers at Wallenberg-funded universities, using Wallenberg-funded equipment with research budgets sustained by Wallenberg grants. Does this corrupt the Nobel process? Probably not directly. The prizes go to genuinely groundbreaking work, but it illustrates how deeply Wallenberg influence penetrates Swedish institutions. There's literally no major Swedish institution, academic, financial, industrial, or cultural, where you can't find Wallenberg connections if you look. The network extends internationally through something called the Wallenberg Sphere Company's International Advisory Board, a private group of global business leaders who meet annually with family members. Membership is invitation only. Attendees have included CEOs from Siemens, General Electric, Nestlé, and major banks. What do they discuss? Officially nothing. There are no public minutes, but the connections matter. When Wallenberg companies need international partners, board members, or crisis management advice, they have a pre-built network of global elites who understand the family's importance. You see, this is the real source of Wallenberg power in the modern era. It's not ownership percentages or voting rights. Those are just legal mechanisms. The real power is social capital accumulated over 7 generations. The power to pick up a phone and reach almost anyone in Swedish society. The power to have your perspective considered first, because everyone assumes Wallenberg interests align with national interests. But here's the vulnerability. This network depends on continued family competence. If a weak generation took control, if internal family conflicts spilled public, if they made a major strategic blunder, the network could evaporate. Patronage networks are loyal only as long as the patron remains powerful. Which brings us to the most secretive aspect of Wallenberg operations, how they've managed 7 generations without a single public family implosion, and what mechanisms ensure the 8th generation will be just as competent as the first. The talent identification system begins surprisingly early. The Wallenbergs don't wait for people to reach executive levels. They identify promising individuals in their 20s and cultivate relationships over decades. The primary mechanism is the Swedish universities, particularly the Stockholm School of Economics. This institution has produced a disproportionate number of Swedish business leaders, and it's been deeply connected to the Wallenberg family since its founding in 1909. The Wallenberg family didn't found the Stockholm School of Economics, but they became its primary private benefactors within a decade. By the 1930s, Wallenberg money funded entire departments. Today, the Wallenberg name is on buildings, professorships, research centers, and scholarship programs throughout the campus. Here's how the pipeline works. Promising undergraduate students at Stockholm School of Economics receive Wallenberg scholarships, covering tuition, providing stipends, and most importantly, granting access to exclusive networking events. These aren't large scholarships in number, perhaps 20-30 annually, but they're prestigious and competitive. Scholarship recipients attend private dinners with Wallenberg Foundation board members, Sphere company executives, and sometimes family members themselves. They receive mentorship from senior executives. They get internship opportunities at Sphere companies that fast-track them toward eventual employment. The scholarships aren't explicitly conditional on future loyalty. They don't need to be. A 22-year-old student who receives financial support, mentorship, and career opportunities from the Wallenberg network naturally feels gratitude and alignment. By the time they're 35 and sitting in a government ministry or corporate boardroom, they've internalized a worldview where Wallenberg interests and Swedish interests are synonymous. The Stockholm School of Economics isn't the only pipeline, but it's the primary one. The Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, serves a similar function for engineering talent. Uppsala University and Lund University have Wallenberg-funded programs that identify academic talent. Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg has deep Wallenberg connections in applied engineering. What's fascinating is how this pipeline has evolved to address changing Swedish demographics. Historically, the network was overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly from upper-middle-class Stockholm families, overwhelmingly ethnically Swedish. That profile became increasingly untenable as Swedish society diversified. Starting in the early 2000s, the Wallenberg Foundations began explicitly prioritizing diversity in their scholarship programs. Not out of pure altruism, out of recognition that homogeneous networks become brittle and disconnected from changing society. Today, Wallenberg scholarship recipients include substantial numbers of women, first-generation university students, and immigrants to Sweden. The network is diversifying its composition while maintaining its function. The cynical interpretation is that this is tokenism, adding diverse faces while maintaining elite power structures. The charitable interpretation is that it's genuine broadening of opportunity. Both are probably partially true. What's certain is that the pipeline produces remarkably consistent results. Wallenberg scholarship recipients from the 1990s now sit in senior government positions, corporate boards, and academic leadership roles. They're making decisions that affect Swedish society while maintaining connections to the network that launched their careers. The network's operational core is corporate board memberships, what Swedish journalists call the spider web. Swedish corporate governance permits individuals to sit on multiple company boards simultaneously. This is common globally, but Sweden has taken it to an extreme. The average Swedish corporate board member sits on 2.8 boards. Among elite executives, that number rises to 5 times 6 boards. This creates what network scientists call small world effects. Any two major Swedish companies are typically connected through shared board members within 2 degrees of separation. The entire Swedish corporate elite knows each other personally and sits in the same rooms making decisions. At the center of this web sits the Wallenberg family and their closest associates. Marcus Wallenberg personally sits on 7 corporate boards. Jacob Wallenberg sits on 6. But the real influence extends through trusted associates who've been cultivated over decades. Take Peter Wallenberg Jr., 5th generation, currently chairman of Investor AB, the family's primary investment vehicle. He sits on boards of several non-Wallenberg companies, including Atlas Copco and SCA. Through these board positions, he interacts with executives from dozens of other Swedish companies who sit on overlapping boards. The network effects are powerful. When a major Swedish company faces a strategic decision, should we accept this acquisition offer? Should we enter this new market? Should we support this regulatory proposal? Board discussions inevitably involve people who have deep connections to the Wallenberg sphere. These board members don't need to receive instructions from the Wallenbergs. They already know how the family thinks about long-term value, strategic positioning, and Swedish industrial policy. They've absorbed it through years of interaction. When they advise other companies, they naturally channel a Wallenberg-influenced perspective. The interlocks extend beyond corporate boards into foundation boards, think tank boards, cultural institution boards. The same 200-300 individuals cycle through these positions, creating an elite network that governs Swedish institutional life. Critics call this network capitalism, where personal relationships matter more than market competition. Defenders call it coordinated capitalism, where long-term relationships enable strategic thinking that pure market competition would destroy. Both descriptions are accurate. The network does reduce pure market competition. It also enables coordination that has helped Swedish companies navigate globalization more successfully than many peers. What's undeniable is that the network serves Wallenberg interests remarkably well. When sphere companies need board members, they have a ready supply of qualified pre-vetted candidates. When they need regulatory intervention, they have board members who can call ministry officials they've known for decades. When they need crisis management, they can activate a network of experienced executives who owe the family favors. Perhaps the most striking network pattern is the rotation between private sector and public sector, what's sometimes called the revolving door in other countries, but operates more systematically in Sweden. Swedish political culture permits, even encourages, government officials to have prior private sector experience. Unlike the American system, where this creates corruption concerns, in Sweden it's seen as bringing valuable expertise to governance. The Wallenbergs have systematically leveraged this. Sphere company executives regularly rotate into government positions, particularly in ministries dealing with industry, trade and finance. They serve for 3 to 5 years, then rotate back to private sector, often into more senior positions than they left. This creates several benefits for the family. First, they have trusted allies inside government during critical policy decisions. Second, those individuals return to the private sector with invaluable knowledge of how government works and connections to officials still in place. Third, it signals to ambitious executives that Wallenberg companies offer not just private sector opportunities, but potential paths to public service and political influence. Look at the pattern in Sweden's Ministry of Industry over the past 30 years. 5 different ministers or state secretaries had prior careers in Wallenberg sphere companies. Not all simultaneously, the rotation happens gradually enough to avoid obvious appearance of capture. But the cumulative effect is that Wallenberg perspectives are always represented in policy discussions. The same pattern appears in regulatory agencies. The Swedish Financial Supervisory Authority has been led by individuals with sphere company backgrounds. The Swedish Competition Authority has employed former sphere executives in senior roles. Even the Swedish Patent and Registration Office has had leadership with Wallenberg connections. Does this constitute corruption? By legal definition, no. These individuals meet qualification requirements and aren't receiving direct payments from the family. By functional definition, it's complicated. These officials make decisions that affect Wallenberg interests. They do so with deep knowledge of and sympathy toward those interests based on prior employment. They often return to sphere companies after government service. The appearance of conflict is obvious, but proving actual corruption is essentially impossible because the influence operates through shared worldviews rather than explicit quid pro quo. The European Union has repeatedly flagged Sweden for insufficient restrictions on revolving door practices. Swedish governments from both left and right have resisted implementing stricter rules. Why? Because the system works for everyone in power. Business leaders get government experience, government gets business expertise, and the Wallenbergs ensure their perspective is always in the room. The university network deserves deeper examination because it's both the most visible and the most defended aspect of Wallenberg influence. The Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation is Sweden's largest private research funder. In 2023, it distributed $212 million to Swedish universities. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 5% of all Swedish government research funding from a single private foundation. This creates obvious dependencies. Swedish universities compete intensely for research funding. Government funding is constrained and distributed through bureaucratic processes. Wallenberg funding is substantial, fast, and strategically deployed toward cutting-edge research. If you're a Swedish university president, Wallenberg grants mean the difference between having world-class research facilities or falling behind international competitors. The foundation funds equipment that government budgets can't afford. It provides salary support that attracts top international researchers. It creates opportunities that make Swedish universities globally competitive. The foundation's grant selection process appears meritocratic. Applications are reviewed by scientific committees. Peer review determines quality. Grants go to the best research proposals, regardless of institutional politics. But here's the thing. The scientific committees are composed of senior Swedish researchers, almost all of whom built their careers using Wallenberg funding. The foundation board that makes final decisions includes Swedish academic leaders who lead universities that receive Wallenberg grants. The entire evaluation system is staffed by people who benefit from maintaining the foundation's reputation and influence. This doesn't mean grants go to bad research. Oh, the science is genuinely excellent, but it does mean research priorities get shaped by foundation preferences, and those preferences consistently align with Wallenberg commercial interests. Look at the foundation's funding priorities over the past decade. Materials science, $400+ million, relevant to manufacturing companies in the sphere. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, $350+ million, relevant to industrial automation. Life sciences and medicine, $800+ million, relevant to AstraZeneca and healthcare investments. Climate and sustainability, $300+ million, relevant to recent green technology pivots. These are also, not coincidentally, Sweden's strongest research areas and sectors where Swedish companies compete globally. The foundation funds research that makes Sweden internationally competitive while simultaneously creating knowledge that sphere companies can commercialize. Is this wrong? Arguably no. It creates genuine public benefit while serving private interests. Is it problematic? Arguably, yes, it gives one family enormous influence over Swedish research priorities without democratic accountability. The foundation has created research environments that are world-class. The SciLife Lab in Stockholm, heavily Wallenberg funded, is one of Europe's leading life science facilities. The Wallenberg AI, Autonomous Systems and Software Program, WASP, is training the next generation of Swedish AI researchers. These are genuine contributions to Swedish science. But they're also strategic investments that ensure Swedish research stays aligned with Wallenberg commercial interests, that the best Swedish researchers feel grateful to the family, and that university leaders see the Wallenbergs as essential partners rather than powerful elites to be questioned. The network extends beyond economics into Swedish cultural life in ways that are subtler but equally significant. The Wallenberg family sits on boards of Sweden's most prestigious cultural institutions, the Royal Dramatic Theatre, the Stockholm Concert Hall, the Modern Museum, the Royal Opera. Their foundations fund exhibitions, performances, acquisitions, and restorations. This cultural patronage serves multiple functions. It burnishes the family's reputation as sophisticated contributors to Swedish cultural life. It creates connections with Sweden's cultural elite, artists, curators, performers, critics. It ensures that Swedish high culture includes voices sympathetic to the family's broader interests. Cultural institutions are always financially precarious. Government funding is limited and unpredictable. Private donations make the difference between thriving and surviving. The Wallenbergs have leveraged this precarity to build influence in spheres far from their commercial interests. When the Royal Dramatic Theatre needed renovation funding, Wallenberg foundations contributed substantially. The family now has input into board composition and strategic direction. When the Modern Museum wanted to acquire a major contemporary art collection, Wallenberg money made it possible. The museum's leadership includes people connected to the Wallenberg network. The influence isn't used crudely. You won't find theatres performing propaganda for Swedish capitalism. But it does mean that Swedish cultural institutions are led by people who see the Wallenbergs as generous patrons, rather than problematic concentrations of power. Swedish cultural critics who might question the family's influence are embedded in institutions that depend on their funding. Museums might hesitate to mount exhibitions critically examining Swedish capitalism. Theatres might avoid plays that portray industrial dynasties negatively. Publishers might think twice about books that investigate the family too aggressively. This creates a cultural environment where the Wallenbergs are either praised or ignored, rarely criticized. The family becomes part of the unquestionable background of Swedish society, like the monarchy, like the Nobel Prizes, like IKEA. Too Swedish, too successful, too embedded to interrogate seriously. Finally, the network extends internationally in ways that magnify the family's influence far beyond Sweden's borders. The Wallenberg Foundation's postdoctoral fellowship program doesn't just support Swedish researchers, it specifically funds Swedish researchers to work at top international institutions: MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, ETH, Zurich. The goal is explicitly to build connections between Swedish and international research communities. These fellows spend 2 to 3 years at international institutions, building relationships with foreign researchers, learning cutting-edge techniques, and representing Swedish science abroad. When they return to Sweden, they maintain those international connections that benefit Swedish research, Swedish universities, and often Wallenberg sphere companies seeking international partnerships. The sphere companies themselves create international networks. ABB employs 110,000 people in 100-plus countries. Ericsson operates in 180 countries. AstraZeneca has research facilities across Europe and America. Each of these companies creates relationships with foreign governments, regulators, universities, and businesses. The Wallenbergs leverage these corporate networks for broader influence. When Swedish government needs to negotiate trade agreements, sphere companies provide information about foreign markets. When Swedish universities want to build international partnerships, sphere companies facilitate introductions. When Swedish research needs foreign collaboration, the network makes connections. This international dimension transforms the Wallenbergs from Swedish power brokers to global influencers. They're not just connected within Sweden, they're connected to global elites who matter for Swedish interests. The family has cultivated particularly strong connections in 3 regions: the United States, through technology and finance, Switzerland through manufacturing and banking, and increasingly China through industrial sales and supply chain integration. These international connections serve as both opportunity and insurance. If Swedish political environment becomes hostile, the family can relocate operations internationally. If Swedish regulations become onerous, they can shift activities to more favorable jurisdictions. The international network provides optionality that purely domestic power would lack. What emerges from examining this network is something remarkable. The Wallenbergs have created a system where opposing them means opposing Swedish success itself. Want to challenge their foundation tax treatment? You're threatening Swedish research funding. Want to restrict their dual-class shares? You're risking corporate relocations that would devastate the Stockholm stock market. Want to reduce their government influence? You're losing valuable private sector expertise in policymaking. Want to question their cultural patronage? You're attacking institutions that depend on their generosity. The network isn't a conspiracy. It's an ecosystem. An ecosystem where the Wallenbergs provide genuine value while ensuring that value creates dependencies that protect their power. Where they cultivate talented people who genuinely believe Wallenberg interests and Swedish interests are identical because they've been carefully selected and socialized to see things that way. It's the most sophisticated form of power preservation imaginable. Make yourself so useful, so embedded, so apparently benevolent that dismantling your power seems unthinkable even to people who might otherwise question concentrated elite control. The question is whether this network can survive the transition to a generation that didn't build it, doesn't remember why it was built, and increasingly questions whether Sweden needs invisible billionaire families making decisions that affect millions of lives. Chapter 8. Future Control Stockholm, 2025. The Wallenberg sphere controls 600 billion in assets across 40 companies. But here's what's changing. For the first time since 1856, the family faces a generation that might not want to continue. Some sixth-generation Wallenbergs are entrepreneurs building their own companies. Some are working in climate activism, deliberately outside the family sphere. Some have married non-Swedes and live abroad. The monolithic family unity that defined previous generations is fracturing. This is the crisis nobody's talking about publicly, but everyone in Swedish elite circles whispers about what happens when a generation of Wallenbergs decides the costs of family duty outweigh the benefits. The costs are real. Family members are wealthy, but not billionaire wealthy as individuals. Most of the money is locked in foundations. They're famous within Sweden, but must maintain grinding discretion. They're expected to serve on boards, attend foundation meetings, uphold family reputation, all while being constantly evaluated by older generations. For previous generations raised in post-war Sweden, this seemed like a fair trade. For current 20-somethings raised in globalized, democratic, increasingly anti-elite Sweden, less clear. The family is adapting. They're allowing more flexibility in career paths. They're permitting family members to pursue ventures outside the sphere. They're even quietly allowing some family members to sell trust distributions and live entirely separate from family operations. But there's a limit. The foundation voting structure only works if family members vote together. If the family truly fragments, if internal conflicts emerge, the whole system could collapse remarkably quickly. Imagine this scenario. The seventh generation splits. Half wants to maintain the traditional model. Half wants to convert foundations to standard ownership, liquidate and divide the wealth. Swedish law would require foundation board approval for major changes, but if the board itself is split, the sphere companies could be vulnerable to hostile takeovers. The foundations could be forced to sell holdings. The network could evaporate as people realize the Wallenbergs are no longer united. In one generation, 170 years of accumulated power could dissipate. Is this likely? Probably not. The family has survived succession crises before. The current generation seems committed to continuity. The sixth generation is being carefully groomed. But it's possible in a way it never was before. The external threats are equally serious. European Union regulators are increasingly skeptical of concentrated ownership. Dual-class shares, the mechanism that lets the Wallenbergs control companies with minority ownership, are under regulatory pressure. If EU law forces one share, one vote rules, the entire Wallenberg control structure becomes untenable. Sweden itself is changing. Immigration and generational turnover mean fewer Swedes have ancestral memory of the Wallenbergs' role in building modern Sweden. To younger, more diverse Swedes, the family isn't legendary nation builders, they're just billionaires who control too. Much public opinion polling from 2020 showed that Swedes under 35 have substantially more negative views of concentrated wealth than older Swedes. That's a demographic time bomb for the Wallenbergs. If Sweden elects genuinely left-wing governments in the 2030s, foundation structures could face legal challenges. The family's response has been characteristically strategic: become more useful, more generous, more publicly beneficial. The foundations have increased research distributions. They've funded climate initiatives. They've backed startups founded by immigrants. They're trying to make the Wallenberg presence beneficial to a Sweden that looks very different from the homogeneous nation their ancestors knew. But here's the paradox. The more useful they become, the more they prove that concentrated private wealth can achieve public good, which undermines arguments for democratic control of the economy. The Wallenbergs are so effective at benevolent elitism that they make elitism seem benevolent. Is that good for Sweden? You could argue yes. The foundations fund research that government budgets can't match. You could argue no. No family should have this much power regardless of how well they use it. Both positions are defensible. What's certain is that the Wallenberg model, family control of major companies through foundation voting structures, has proliferated across Sweden. The Stenbeck family, the Lundberg family, the Bonnier family all use similar structures. The Wallenbergs didn't just build a dynasty, they created a template for Swedish capitalism. About 15 families now control roughly 70% of the Stockholm Stock Exchange through foundation-based voting control. The Wallenbergs are the largest and most influential, but they're not alone. They've essentially replicated themselves. This has created a weird Swedish economic system, superficially democratic and egalitarian in social policy, but with corporate governance more concentrated than most monarchies. Sweden simultaneously has strong labor unions and strong family business dynasties, high taxes and massive inherited wealth, progressive social values, and entrenched elite power. The Wallenbergs are both the architects and the main beneficiaries of this paradox. They've built a system where they can be wealthy, powerful, and progressive all at once, which is exactly what makes them so difficult to dislodge. Looking forward, the family faces two paths. They can continue the traditional model: sphere company control, foundation governance, network influence, generational succession, and hope Swedish society continues to accept their role. Or they can adapt more radically, perhaps converting to standard ownership, going fully global, abandoning the Swedish national identity that's defined them for 170 years. Current signs suggest they're choosing continuity. Marcus and Jacob Wallenberg, now approaching 70, are grooming successors who understand the traditional model. The foundations continue funding Swedish research. The sphere companies remain headquartered in Stockholm, even as they operate globally. But the world is changing faster than ever before. Technology is disrupting industries. Geopolitics is fracturing global trade. Demographics are transforming Sweden. Climate change is forcing economic restructuring. Can a model designed in 1856 survive 2056? The Wallenbergs are betting yes, that fundamental principles of patient capital, long-term thinking, network building, and beneficial power still work even as specifics change. They might be right. After all, they've survived every previous transition that observers said would end them. Industrialization, world wars, globalization, financialization. Each time, experts predicted the end of the Wallenberg era. Each time, the family adapted and emerged stronger, or they might finally face the limits of what one family can control in an increasingly complex, democratic, transparent world. Either way, understanding the Wallenberg story is essential to understanding how modern capitalism actually works, not through markets and competition, but through networks, legacy, and the patient accumulation of power over generations. Stockholm, 2025. The Wallenberg sphere controls 600 billion in assets across 40 companies. But here's what's changing. For the first time since 1856, the family faces a generation that might not want to continue. Some sixth-generation Wallenbergs are entrepreneurs building their own companies. Some are working in climate activism, deliberately outside the family sphere. Some have married non-Swedes and live abroad. The monolithic family unity that defined previous generations is fracturing. This is the crisis nobody's talking about publicly, but everyone in Swedish elite circles whispers about what happens when a generation of Wallenbergs decides the costs of family duty outweigh the benefits. The costs are real. Family members are wealthy, but not billionaire wealthy as individuals. Most of the money is locked in foundations. They're famous within Sweden, but must maintain grinding discretion. They're expected to serve on boards, attend foundation meetings, uphold family reputation, all while being constantly evaluated by older generations. For previous generations raised in post-war Sweden, this seemed like a fair trade. For current 20-somethings raised in globalized, democratic, increasingly anti-elite Sweden, less clear. The family is adapting. They're allowing more flexibility in career paths. They're permitting family members to pursue ventures outside the sphere. They're even, quietly, allowing some family members to sell trust distributions and live entirely separate from family operations. But there's a limit. The foundation voting structure only works if family members vote together. If the family truly fragments, if internal conflicts emerge, the whole system could collapse remarkably quickly. Imagine this scenario. The seventh generation splits. Half wants to maintain the traditional model. Half wants to convert foundations to standard ownership, liquidate and divide the wealth. Swedish law would require foundation board approval for major changes, but if the board itself is split, the sphere companies could be vulnerable to hostile takeovers. The foundations could be forced to sell holdings. The network could evaporate as people realize the Wallenbergs are no longer united. In one generation, 170 years of accumulated power could dissipate. Is this likely? Probably not. The family has survived succession crises before. The current generation seems committed to continuity. The sixth generation is being carefully groomed, but it's possible in a way it never was before. The external threats are equally serious. But the most existential isn't regulatory, it's technological irrelevance. Consider what's happened to traditional Wallenberg industries in just the past decade. ABB, once the crown jewel representing cutting-edge electrical engineering, now competes in commoditized industrial automation. Its market capitalization has barely grown since 2010, while software companies have increased tenfold. Ericsson tells an even starker story. The company dominated telecommunications equipment for decades, until Chinese competitors Huawei and ZTE appeared with government backing and willingness to operate at razor-thin margins. Between 2000 and 2020, Ericsson's market share in telecom infrastructure dropped from 40% to 15%. The Wallenbergs still control it, but they're controlling a shrinking pie. Here's what's interesting. The family recognized this problem earlier than most observers realized. Starting around 2012, they began a quiet but systematic pivot toward what they call deep tech, technologies requiring both hardware, expertise, and software integration. The strategy emerged from a series of private family meetings in 2011, following the Steve Jobs death. Marcus Wallenberg reportedly told the family council, "We've spent 150 years controlling the physical infrastructure of the economy. Software is eating that infrastructure. We either adapt or we become museum pieces." The adaptation strategy had three components, each reflecting classic Wallenberg methodology applied to new domains. First, they repositioned existing sphere companies towards software-hardware integration. ABB acquired dozens of industrial software companies between 2012-2020, transforming from a pure equipment manufacturer into an Industry 4.0 platform provider. The company now sells factory optimization algorithms as much as robots. Ericsson similarly pivoted toward 5G network software and cloud infrastructure management, not just selling antennas, but selling the entire network as a service. The margin profile is different, the competitive dynamics are different, but it keeps Ericsson relevant in an era when physical telecom equipment is increasingly commoditized. Second, they made strategic minority investments in promising Swedish tech startups, not to own them, but to build relationships. Spotify is the famous example. The Wallenbergs invested early through Investor AB, their publicly traded investment vehicle, took board seats, helped navigate international expansion, and profited enormously when the company went public. But Spotify wasn't the only one. Look at the pattern between 2010-2025, Klarna, fintech. Early Wallenberg backing, now valued at 6 billion Northvolt, battery technology. Heavily Wallenberg funded, positioned to dominate European EV batteries. H2 green steel production. Wallenberg incubated to decarbonize Swedish steel industry. King, gaming. Early connections to Wallenberg network, sold to Activision for $6 billion. The investments share common characteristics. Swedish founded, capital-intensive enough that traditional VCs hesitate, requiring both technical expertise and industrial scaling. Industries where the Wallenberg network provides genuine value beyond just capital. You see, the family learned that they can't compete with Silicon Valley venture capital in pure software plays, but in deep tech requiring hardware integration, regulatory navigation, and industrial partnerships. That's still Wallenberg territory. Third, and most subtly, they've positioned themselves as the bridge between European industrial power and American tech innovation. This is pure network play, using accumulated relationships on both continents to facilitate deals that benefit everyone while keeping the Wallenbergs central. When Microsoft wanted to build data centers in Sweden to serve European customers, who helped navigate Swedish energy contracts, real estate, and government approvals, Wallenberg connected intermediaries. When Google needed Nordic renewable energy for their operations, who facilitated those deals? The same network. The family isn't owning these tech giants, they're making themselves useful to them. It's the same strategy André Oscar used in 1856. Position yourself at the intersection of capital flows, and you profit from the entire ecosystem. But technology isn't the only force reshaping their empire. Climate change represents both the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity the Wallenbergs have faced since World War II. Threat, because their traditional sphere is carbon-intensive. ABB's industrial equipment powers factories running on fossil fuels. Their mining investments extract resources using diesel equipment. Their historical legacy is fundamentally tied to the carbon-based industrial economy. Opportunity, because decarbonization requires exactly what the Wallenbergs provide: massive capital for long-term infrastructure investments, technical expertise in complex engineering, and patient willingness to build over decades rather than quarters. The family made a pivotal strategic decision around 2016. They would lead European decarbonization, not resist it. This wasn't altruism, it was calculation. Sweden was going green regardless of Wallenberg preference. The choice was whether to fight the transition and eventually lose, or to shape the transition and profit from it. The execution has been methodical. Between 2016 and 2025, Wallenberg foundations and sphere companies committed over $15 billion to green technology investments. Northvolt received $1.2 billion in Wallenberg-coordinated financing to build Europe's largest battery factory in northern Sweden. The location wasn't accidental. Near Wallenberg-connected hydroelectric power in a region where Wallenberg mining operations already existed, employing workers from communities that had supported Wallenberg companies for generations. H2. Green steel represents an even bolder bet. Steel production is responsible for 7% of global carbon emissions. It's also absolutely essential. You can't build buildings, cars, or infrastructure without it. The traditional process requires coking coal. H2 green steel replaces that with hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. The technology is unproven at scale. The capital requirements are staggering: $5 billion for the first plant. The timeline is decades before profitability. It's exactly the kind of patient, capital-intensive, technically complex investment that the Wallenberg model was built for and that short-term financial markets can't support. If it works, H2 Green Steel positions Sweden as the global leader in zero-carbon steel production. If it fails, the Wallenbergs lose billions but maintain their reputation as willing to take risks for Swedish industrial leadership. Their outcome strengthens their narrative. What's interesting is how this climate positioning interacts with generational politics. The sixth-generation Wallenbergs are substantially more climate-focused than their parents, not because of different values necessarily, but because they recognize climate as the defining economic transformation of their lifetime. Several sixth-generation family members have taken personal leadership roles in climate ventures. They're not just passive investors, they're visible advocates at climate conferences, in Swedish media, in government consultations. This visibility is unusual for a family that typically avoids personal publicity. The calculation is clear. Climate leadership provides moral legitimacy that pure wealth cannot. It positions the family as forward-thinking rather than backward-looking. It creates common cause with younger, more progressive Swedes who might otherwise resent concentrated family wealth, but it also creates internal tensions. Some older family members reportedly question whether climate investments generate adequate returns. Some worry that visible climate activism invites scrutiny of the family's historical carbon footprint. The family has stayed unified so far, but climate strategy is apparently a source of ongoing internal debate. Then there's the geopolitical dimension, which might be the most dangerous variable the family has ever faced. For 170 years, the Wallenbergs thrived in a stable, neutral Sweden, operating in a relatively open global economy. Companies could manufacture anywhere, sell anywhere, source capital anywhere. The family sphere could be simultaneously Swedish, European, and global without contradiction. That world is ending. The US-China rivalry is forcing companies to choose sides. European strategic autonomy means pressure to onshore critical production. Russian aggression has shattered Nordic security assumptions. The entire framework that made the Wallenberg global empire possible is fracturing. The family is navigating this minefield with characteristic subtlety, but it's not clear they can win. Consider the dilemmas. Ericsson's 5G equipment competes directly with Chinese Huawei. The US government wants European countries to ban Huawei, which would benefit Ericsson. But China is a massive market for other Wallenberg companies. ABB does significant business there, as do several sphere manufacturing companies, supporting US policy on telecom risks. Chinese retaliation against other sphere interests. The Wallenberg solution has been to quietly support Huawei bans in Western markets while maintaining scrupulous neutrality in public statements. Ericsson executives talk about security concerns without mentioning China by name. It's classic Wallenberg, benefit from geopolitical tensions while avoiding visible alignment with either side. But this gets harder as conflicts intensify. If the EU demands that critical technologies be EU-sourced, what happens to sphere companies with Chinese manufacturing? If the US imposes secondary sanctions on companies doing business with Chinese firms, what happens to ABB's China operations? The family has no good options, only least bad choices. They're reportedly developing contingency plans for radical corporate restructuring, potentially splitting global companies into regional entities, relocating manufacturing, even accepting reduced profitability to maintain access to multiple markets. Here's where the Sweden dimension becomes crucial. Swedish neutrality might provide cover that other European companies lack. The Wallenbergs have begun emphasizing their company's Swedish identity more explicitly, not as nationalistic branding, but as geopolitical positioning. "We're not American or Chinese, we're Swedish," becomes a way to operate across dividing lines. Whether this works depends partly on whether Sweden maintains credible neutrality. The country's recent NATO application complicates this strategy. If Sweden is fully integrated into Western military alliances, the neutrality argument becomes less persuasive to China and other non-aligned countries. The Wallenbergs reportedly opposed Swedish NATO membership privately, though they would never say so publicly. The calculation was straightforward. Swedish neutrality had economic value to the sphere. NATO membership has security benefits, but economic costs in terms of reduced flexibility. They lost that debate. Swedish public opinion shifted dramatically after Russian aggression in Ukraine. It's a rare example of the Wallenbergs being unable to shape a major Swedish policy decision. Whether it proves costly depends on how rigidly new geopolitical blocs form over the coming decades. Which brings us back to the most fundamental question. Who will run this empire in 2050? And will they want to? Current leadership, Marcus and Jacob Wallenberg, both approaching 70, represent the last generation with living memory of the family's mid-century peak. They were raised by fathers who knew the World War II generation. They absorbed family doctrine directly from people who built the modern sphere. The sixth generation has a different relationship to family legacy. They know the Wallenberg story, but as history rather than lived experience. They've been groomed for leadership, but in a world where elite privilege is increasingly questioned. They're wealthy, but not unusually so by global billionaire standards. They're powerful, but in ways that require constant effort to maintain. Family insiders describe a subtle generation gap. The fifth generation sees sphere stewardship as duty and privilege. The sixth generation sees it more as career option, prestigious and lucrative but optional. Not every sixth generation Wallenberg wants to spend their life on corporate boards and foundation committees. This attitude shift could be fatal to the family model. The sphere only works if the most capable family members dedicate their careers to it. If top talent pursues other opportunities, the family is left with less capable leaders facing increasingly complex challenges. That's how dynasties decline, not through dramatic collapse but through gradual talent drain. The family is trying to make sphere leadership more attractive. They've increased compensation for family executives. They've allowed more operational autonomy rather than collective decision-making. They've created roles for family members in newer, more exciting ventures like Northvolt and climate tech, rather than just traditional manufacturing. But there's a limit to how much they can adapt without destroying what makes the structure work. If family members operate as independent entrepreneurs rather than coordinated sphere stewards, the network effects disappear. If they prioritize personal wealth over sphere preservation, the foundation structure becomes just a tax dodge rather than a governance system. The succession plan reportedly involves identifying 2 to 3 sixth-generation leaders for co-leadership, similar to how Marcus and Jacob share power currently. This spreads the burden and reduces single point of failure risk, but it also requires finding multiple family members willing to dedicate 30-plus years to sphere management. Are there 3 such people in the 6th generation? Family observers are divided. Some see several highly capable, deeply committed potential leaders. Others worry that the most talented 6th generation Wallenbergs are pursuing opportunities outside the sphere precisely because they're talented enough to succeed independently. What's certain is that the 7th generation, currently children and teenagers, will face an even starker choice. By the time they reach leadership age around 2050-2060, will the Wallenberg sphere model still be relevant? Will Swedish public opinion still accept concentrated family control? Will the foundation legal structure still exist in its current form? If the answer to any of those questions is no, the 7th generation might be the one that finally liquidates the empire, converts foundations to standard ownership, and becomes conventionally wealthy rather than uniquely powerful. Meanwhile, regulatory pressure is mounting from multiple directions simultaneously. European Union authorities have become increasingly skeptical of dual-class share structures that let founding families control public companies with minority ownership. The EU's sustainable finance regulations, implemented between 2020-2025, require greater ownership transparency. The stated goal is preventing money laundering and tax evasion. The practical effect is making it harder to maintain complex ownership structures through foundations and holding companies. Swedish regulators have historically protected domestic ownership structures. The Wallenberg model is essentially Swedish economic policy, but EU law supersedes national law. If Brussels decides dual-class shares distort markets, Sweden can't unilaterally protect them. The Wallenbergs have prepared for this through intensive lobbying, not crude political donations, but sophisticated engagement with EU policymaking. They fund research on the economic benefits of long-term ownership. They place sympathetic academics on expert committees. They cultivate relationships with key European parliamentarians. The argument they make is sophisticated. Dual-class structures enable long-term strategic thinking that benefits all stakeholders, not just shareholders. They point to research showing that controlled companies invest more in R&D, maintain employment during downturns, and focus on sustainability rather than quarterly earnings. There's evidence supporting this. Wallenberg sphere companies do invest heavily in long-term projects. They do maintain workforces. They do take climate commitments seriously in ways that pure financial return maximizing companies might not. But the counter-argument is equally compelling. No matter how benevolent, concentrated control is anti-democratic. Minority shareholders in Wallenberg companies have essentially no say in major decisions. The foundation voting structure means that public investors provide capital, but family members make strategic choices. The regulatory battle is ongoing. The Wallenbergs have won so far. EU rules contain carve-outs for historic ownership structures that essentially grandfather the Swedish system. But each regulatory revision brings renewed debate. What happens if they lose? If EU law eventually mandates one share, one vote, the entire Wallenberg control structure collapses overnight. They'd go from controlling 40% of Swedish corporate votes to controlling perhaps 10% based on economic ownership. The family's contingency planning reportedly includes several options. Option 1. Accept reduced control, maintain sphere cohesion through informal coordination. This works only if sphere company management remains aligned with family interests. Possible but fragile. Option 2. Take sphere companies private through leveraged buyouts. This requires enormous capital and would likely mean selling some companies to fund purchases of others. The sphere would shrink, but control would be absolute. Option 3. Restructure around the most strategically important companies, letting others drift out of the sphere. Focus the family's limited capital and attention on a smaller set of core holdings. Option 4. The nuclear option. Liquidate the entire sphere. Convert everything to cash and marketable securities, and become a pure investment family like the Rothschilds. Maximum wealth preservation, zero operational control. Which option they choose depends on how much they value control versus wealth, legacy versus flexibility, Swedish identity versus global opportunity. These aren't easy trade-offs, and different family members reportedly prefer different options. The good news for family unity is that they probably won't have to make this choice immediately. EU regulatory change is slow. The Swedish government will fight to protect domestic ownership structures as long as possible. The family likely has a decade or more to prepare, but the trajectory seems clear. The regulatory environment is moving against concentrated family control. The Wallenbergs can slow this, but probably can't stop it. At some point, the 7th or 8th generation will face a choice their ancestors never confronted. Preserve power by abandoning the traditional model, or preserve the model but accept radically diminished power, which leads to the deepest question the current generation faces. What is the Wallenberg legacy supposed to be? For 170 years, the answer was obvious. Build Swedish industrial power. Create companies that employ Swedes, serve Swedish interests, and make Sweden internationally competitive. The family's power was justified by national benefit, but in a globalized world, is there still such a thing as a Swedish company? ABB is technically Swiss, AstraZeneca is British-Swedish, Ericsson manufactures in China and India. The sphere companies are Swedish in headquarters location and historical origin, but they're global in operations and ownership. If the companies aren't really Swedish anymore, what justifies Swedish family control? The foundation research funding? That's significant, but arguably could be done more democratically through government or independent philanthropies. Some 6th-generation family members are reportedly questioning this. If we're just wealthy investors, they ask, why maintain the burdensome sphere structure? Why not simplify, diversify, and become a family office like thousands of other wealthy families? The counter-argument comes from family traditionalists. The sphere isn't just about wealth, it's about stewardship, legacy, and national service. It represents 170 years of accumulated knowledge about long-term value creation. Abandoning it would betray previous generations and deprive future generations of something unique. There's also a practical concern. Dissolution is irreversible. Once the sphere is liquidated, it can never be rebuilt. The network effects, the accumulated relationships, the hard-won market positions, all of that evaporates permanently. Better to preserve optionality by maintaining the structure even if its purpose has become unclear. The family appears to be choosing preservation while debating purpose. They're maintaining the sphere, funding the foundations, grooming the next generation, while simultaneously allowing more flexibility and questioning more openly than any previous generation. What's fascinating is how this internal uncertainty is completely invisible externally. To outside observers, the Wallenbergs appear as unified and purposeful as ever. The sphere continues operating. The foundations continue funding research. The family maintains its customary discretion, but people close to the family describe a quiet crisis of meaning that previous generations never faced. When your ancestors built an empire to serve clear national purpose, and that purpose has become ambiguous, what exactly are you preserving and why? The answer will define whether the Wallenberg dynasty survives another 170 years or gracefully dissolves within a generation. Either outcome is possible. Either might even be correct. What's certain is that the invisible billionaires who control 40% of Sweden's economy are facing challenges that invisibility, wealth, and power can't easily solve. The world is changing faster than adaptation mechanisms refined over 7 generations. Technology is disrupting industries faster than patient capital can redirect. Geopolitics is forcing choices that the Wallenberg model was designed to avoid. For the first time since 1856, it's genuinely unclear whether the Wallenberg dynasty has a future, not because they're failing, but because the context that made them possible is disappearing. The next decade will reveal whether they're adaptable enough to survive or whether we're watching the slow-motion conclusion of the most successful family business dynasty in European history. So we've seen how one family went from a disgraced naval officer's desperate bank to controlling 40% of Sweden's economy. They did it through several key innovations: the foundation system that made their control permanent, the sphere strategy that gave them influence without full ownership, the network approach that made them essential to Swedish success, and above all, the long-term thinking that let them build across generations what no individual could build in a lifetime. Today, 170 years after André Oscar opened that first bank, his descendants control companies employing 600,000 people worldwide, generating 150 billion in annual revenue, and absolutely dominating Swedish industry. They fund half of Swedish research. They influence government policy. They shape what industries Sweden enters and exits. When you step back and look at the full picture, the Wallenbergs have achieved something almost no other family has. They've outlasted the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies. They've maintained a coherent strategy across 7 generations. They've turned banking profits into industrial dominance, into international reach, all while staying remarkably scandal-free. But there's a darker side to acknowledge. They've accumulated this power in a democracy that supposedly opposes hereditary privilege. They've used legal structures to avoid taxes while benefiting from public infrastructure. They've had disproportionate influence over Swedish policy for 170 years. Influence that was never democratically granted and can't be democratically removed. The real lesson here isn't about wealth or business strategy. It's about how power actually works in modern societies. We like to think democracies run on votes and laws, but in Sweden, and probably in your country too, there are shadow structures of elite power that shape everything underneath the democratic surface. The Wallenbergs are just unusual in being visible if you look closely. Most elite networks are even more hidden. Most wealthy families are even more protective of their privacy. The Wallenbergs at least fund public goods and maintain Swedish companies. Others simply extract. So the question remains, is Sweden better off with the Wallenbergs? Would Swedish innovation have happened without their capital and guidance? So has the country paid too high a price in concentrated power for whatever economic benefits they provided? You could argue they've been remarkably responsible stewards of enormous power. You could argue no family should have that power, regardless of how responsibly they use it. You could argue both are true simultaneously. What's certain is that the Wallenberg model, patient capital, long-term thinking, family continuity, foundation structures, network influence, is being studied by wealthy families worldwide. From Silicon Valley to Singapore, people are learning from how the Wallenbergs turned banking profits into permanent dynastic power. Whether we like it or not, the Wallenberg story isn't just Swedish history. It's a blueprint for how 21st century oligarchy might operate. Invisible, beneficial, deeply embedded, and almost impossible to dislodge. If you made it this far through 55 minutes of Swedish financial history, drop a 2 in the comments. I know this was dense, but here's why it matters. The Wallenberg model is spreading. Understanding how one family controlled a nation's economy for 170 years helps you recognize when it's happening in your country. Elite power is most effective when it's invisible, so making it visible is valuable. If you want more deep dives into the hidden systems that actually run our economies, hit subscribe. I'm working on similar videos about the Samsung family's control of South Korea, the oligarchs behind Norway's oil wealth, and the Swiss banking families you've never heard of who move trillions. Next up, I'm covering something completely different but equally fascinating. How IKEA used tax havens and foundation structures, sound familiar, to become a $50 billion furniture empire while technically being owned by a charity. The Swedish playbook goes deeper than just the Wallenbergs. Thanks for watching, and remember, follow the money, but more importantly, follow the voting rights. That's where real power hides.